Hi there, Jeremy O'Carroll, founder and director of the Fitzroy Learning Centres here. Thanks for joining me on another training video. Today I'd like to talk to you about reading in a phonics classroom. Many of you have experience teaching in different classrooms, maybe whole language or even perhaps phonics classrooms. But what I want to do today is just focus on some of the critical elements that we've discovered over the 36 years in the classroom that are important for teaching phonics successfully. So I'd just like to go through a few key points that I think will be really helpful for you to remember. The first thing to note is that when we teach phonics, at least in the very early levels, it's important to get kids to sound out the words. There'll be the temptation for them just to say the words whole, and quite possibly they're actually going to be able to do this fairly well, but you need to just slow them down a bit and get them to sound out word, letter sound by letter sound by letter sound. Now, why are we going to do this? Well, the reason is that we need to make sure that they know all the basic letter sounds. And at first, it's very easy for them, remember, when there's not much text, to actually just look at the picture on the page and guess as a result of it. For instance, they see a picture of a fat cat and they say, a fat cat. They're not actually reading, they're just looking at the picture. Or sometimes with these stories, children just actually memorize the entire story. And again, they don't need to even look at the words, but they can read the story. So what we want to make sure is that they're actually reading and they know all the basic letter sounds. And the best way to do that is to get them to sound out the words letter sound by letter sound. K, at, t. A next thing that you might like to do then is get them every now and again to sound out the whole word or a sentence. For instance, they could say k at t cat, s at t sat, and so on. Now, if you've played your phonics games, you're probably not going to need to do too much of that. But what you might like to do then is just go over the whole sentence once you finish. For instance, k at t, s at o at a cat sat on a mat. So you say the whole sentence. Now if it's a very large sentence, what you're probably going to want to do is just divide it in half. So sound out the first half, then repeat it in whole words, then sound out the second half, then repeat that in whole words. That way you're always going to be sure that the children are actually understanding what they're reading, because what we don't want, of course, is for them just to be robotically sounding out words, at, at, but not understanding what they're reading. So sometimes it's a good idea to get them to repeat the whole sentence, but this time in whole words, but only after you've already got them to sound out the words. Now another important principle is no guesswork. At least inside our method, where everything's so carefully calibrated, where every little piece builds on the next piece, and we only get you to read something if we know you've already got the tools to read it, to decode it, then we don't ever want guesswork. Now, sometimes this could arise with things like special words, but hopefully, remember, we've done our pre-reading activities, and you've actually taught these special words before you get to the readers. Or sometimes it might just happen that a kid's reading words, and he just guesses anything. Don't allow that to happen. If a child starts guessing, say no, look at the words on the page, look at the letters, and get him or her to sound them out letter by letter by letter. Because you've given them the tools to do that. And so there's actually never any need to guess. It is a habit that some kids form, but stamp it out immediately and make it a rule that in your classroom there will be no guesswork. Certainly not without system anyway, because there's nothing they should need to guess at all. If it's in there, they have the tools to decode it. Guessing is just a bad habit to get into. Next thing you might like to do is get students to actually put their fingers under the words as they're reading or as you're reading. Now, depending on how many class sets you've got, you might either have one book for each student. Now, if that's the case, they're going to be able to read it along with you or along with whoever's reading it. And as it's been read, get them to put their finger under either the letter or the word. Now, in the early readers, you want them to put their fingers under the letter A, B, I, G, P, I, G, and get them to do it that way. The reason you do that is because you want to focus their attention where you want it. Remember, with little kids, it's easy for their mind to kind of wander up here, they're wandering there, they're looking at the spider in the corner of the room, they're looking at the boy, scratching his nose over there. You don't want any of that. You want them to be focused on what you're reading, because it's only when they're focused that they're going to be learning. So how do you do that? Well, you can get them to focus where you are by pointing their finger. Now, if you're the only person with the set, then what you're going to have to do is point and get everyone to follow your finger so that they're also concentrating on the part of the page where you are. And that way you'll ensure that they're focused on what you're teaching them. Next rule, which is fairly basic, this is just a psychological principle. I guess it's not really reserved to phonics, but it's important to say, and that is that when a child makes a mistake, you want to just gently correct them. Now, this can be difficult at times. I mean, sometimes you've just had a tough day. You know, you haven't had enough sleep, you got caught in a traffic jam, your husband growled at you for no apparent reason in the morning, your boss at the centre wasn't overly polite. All these things could go wrong, and you get to class and little Johnny insists on making the same mistake he's made time and time and time again. And it just gets very frustrating, and you can feel the frustration from the tough day, all the frustration for those weeks training little Johnny on this particular point. You can feel it bubbling up almost volcanically, just wanting to erupt, just wanting to burst out of your mouth. But no, you've got to take a few deep Zen breaths and say, "Oh no, Johnny, that's not how it's done, that's not what it is." Correct him gently and move on. You don't make a big song and dance of it. You don't say it's right, you don't praise him, but you just gently correct him and move on. And that way you'll get the best results. Because remember, we want the children to be feeling good about themselves. If they feel good about themselves, they're going to enjoy coming to class, and they'll be in the best state of mind to learn effectively. Okay, so let's imagine then that we're in a class, and let me just grab the first reader, a fat cat, and I will shoot through to a page. Let's go to a page a bit further at the end, and let's imagine that we're actually reading this. In fact, I might go to the very final page. Okay, now imagine we're reading in this class. How would we do it? Well, we'd point our finger to the letter or word. So we go A, and then remember we're sounding out the whole sentence. A, R, A, T, O, N, A, B, A, T. O, N, A, K, at. I, N, A, at. O, N, A, M, at. A rat on a bat, on a cat, in a hat, on a mat. Now, if that sentence was a little bit long for your students, you could have sounded it out up to, say, the word cat, then said a rat on a bat, on a cat, and then started again, I, N, A, and so on and so forth. Now, you might be saying, gee, it's going to be a bit laborious if we have to sound out every single reader in the series. Well, don't worry, that's not the case. You're not going to have to sound out word after word forever. You're just going to need to do it for the first readers. Now, this could be for the first set of readers 1 to 10, but more likely it's probably going to be up to about reader 6 or 7. And why you're doing it is because you need to make sure, as I said, that the children, your students, actually know very thoroughly all the basic letter sounds. You can't risk them not knowing them, because that's the foundation of our phonics and any phonics program, really. So, get them to sound it out, and if you do so, then at a certain point, you'll know that they're very familiar with all the letter sounds, and once you're absolutely certain that they know them all without any problems, and there's no risk of confusion between any of the letters, then from that moment on, it's totally fine to get students to just say whole words. And what you'll probably find is, as you advance in the levels, children will say whole words, and just on the more difficult words they're less familiar with, they might pause and actually sound that bit out, just to decode the word, and then after a few shots they won't need to decode it anymore and break it down into its sounds, and they can just say that word whole. Another thing you might be wondering is whether we have to say A all the time. You'll notice when I was reading it out, I was saying, A, at, etc., on, otten, A, and I gave it that long A sound. That isn't really natural, is it? Because, I mean, if I were reading normally, I'd say, fat cat sat on mat, etc. So, am I going to have to say A forever? Well, no, I'm not. I'm only going to have to say A until I'm certain that there's not any chance of confusing the sound, the sound with the sound the letter U makes. And once I know there's not going to be any chance of confusion, once I know my students are very familiar with all the sounds the letters make, then from that moment on it's quite okay for them just to say Now, of course, in Singapore and Malaysia you say more an and that's okay too. Okay, so let me just go on to a few final kind of psychological points to consider when reading and taking reading in the classroom. The first is I want you to be a little bit animated. You know, with little kids, you have to show a lot of energy. If you like, talk in a monotone and in a very boring way like this, "Good morning, children, I have no energy, so I will just talk like this," then you've got very little chance of engaging them. Children kind of feed off your energy. So if you're energetic, if you're dynamic, then they're going to want to participate. But if you are boring like this, then they will not pay attention. So make sure that you bring some energy to the class. And if you're feeling tired, well, you've just got to generate that energy. And hopefully, after a bit, you'll actually feel it. You know, there's the saying, fake it until you make it. So you might just have to fake it a little bit to begin with. And hopefully soon that will feed you and create a little bit of energy for you. The next thing I want you to do is actually look like you're enjoying taking the class. Kids are pretty clever and they're going to take their cue from you. So if you look like you're having a very dull time, what are they unconsciously going to presume? Well, they're going to unconsciously presume if Miss So-and-so is bored, then learning to read English is boring. And so they're not going to want to participate. Whereas if you look like you're having a lot of fun, then they're going to want to join in the fun. That's just natural. So when you're teaching, just look like you're having fun and the kids are going to take their cue from you and they're going to join in and want to join in that fun. Finally, I want you to kind of be very present when you're teaching. And this isn't always easy because, you know, imagine after teaching for a couple of years a fat cat. Imagine teaching hundreds and hundreds of students a fat cat. Now, you've read it that many times. It's not that easy to be excited when you read it again. You know it all off by heart. You know it backwards. You could probably say it backwards. So how then can you really stay engaged? Well, you've got to make the effort, and I'll tell you why. If you do what is very easy to do, and that is you're reading a, at, k, at, s, at, o, n, a, m, at, and you're reading and reading and reading, but really your brain is thinking about Friday night with the girls. Well, if you're thinking about Friday night with the girls but reading like that, then lots of little things can start going wrong. Maybe it's as simple as the kids aren't paying attention or they're not putting their fingers where they should be putting it. Maybe you start to speed up. Maybe you start to say instead of a. There are a lot of little things that can go wrong. And maybe even just the most important thing, if your mind is off with the girls on Friday night and what you're going to wear and what you're going to do, then how can your energy levels be high where you are? They can't. And remember we said that little kids feed off your energy. So if your energy levels are kind of low in the classroom because most of your energy is off with the girls on Friday night, then you're hardly going to be engaging the students. And as a result, they're more likely to just dream and, you know, start crawling under the tables or whatever because you're not going to be able to engage them fully. So when you're teaching in the classroom, be totally present. Okay, so that's it for this section. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. And I look forward to meeting you on the next training video. See you then.